I am afraid of the dark. There are nightlights all over my house, and I say that they're there for my kids, but the truth is, they're there for me. And so I find a certain amount of comfort in the fact that one of the most popular phrases you find in the Bible is some variation, some version of be not afraid, do not be afraid, do not fear. But the thing is, just hearing be not afraid doesn't stop me from being afraid. I still don't know what's in that dark room. But when you start to look at what's beneath the story, what it is that God is actually saying to us when he tells us not to be afraid, it makes a huge difference. It's at the very beginning of the Gospel of Luke that we hear one of those be not afraid statements. Now, it's a story you're pretty familiar with. Many of us will recall the scene where an angel appears to Mary and says, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God." Mary had lots of good reasons to be afraid. There is a certain intimidation that comes with the announcement of a new life, of a kid coming. But add on to the fact that she was fairly young. She would have been about 14 years old. That's the age you would have married in that culture at that time. She didn't know how Joseph would respond to the news. And the reality is she's living in a culture where being unmarried and pregnant could result in her own death. All of these are reasons why she could have been afraid. But regardless of how she felt, her response was, "Behold, I am the handmaiden of the Lord. Let it be done unto me according to your word." Now, a few years ago, Pope Francis was reflecting on this moment, on this story from the gospel, what we call the Annunciation. And he was looking at reasons why Mary wasn't afraid. And he was trying to explain to us why we don't need to be afraid either, whatever it might be that we're facing, whether it's something simple like heights of the dark or something much more dramatic. Here's a couple of the reasons Pope Francis gave. One, the first reason not to fear is the fact that God has called us by name. Think about it. The message from the angel says, "Do not be afraid, Mary." One of the things you see over and over and over again in the Bible is some version or some moment where God talks about the fact that we too are called by name. We are known by name by God. "Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, and you are mine." Understand, creation is not some giant game of Risk where God doesn't care if a few of us are lost. In the Gospels, it talks about the fact that God knows every bird, every sparrow that falls from the sky, or God has counted every one of the hairs upon your head. God knows you. God knows you by your name, and God cares for you by your name. And that's something we should find great comfort in. But it goes further than that. It's not just that he knows our name. It's also that he knows our story.
Start? I don't feel so good.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir. Please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
Why does this bother us so much? Well, it bothers us because we know Peter's story. We know Peter was an orphan raised by his aunt and his uncle. We know Peter's uncle Ben passed away. We know that Tony Stark has become like a surrogate father to Peter Parker. We feel for Peter's story. And similarly, this is how God sees us. He knows our victories, he knows our accomplishments, he knows our failures and our defeats. Pope Francis says, our life is not pure chance or a mere struggle for survival. Rather, each of us is a cherished story loved by God. Now, I know that everyone who's watching this video, you're scared of something. Maybe you're scared of some of the small somethings like I am, heights in the dark and public speaking, maybe spiders or clowns or who knows what else. But I know you also face some of the deeper fears that every person faces. Fears of rejection and being alone. Fears of failure. Fears of pain and suffering and death. And it's to all of these that God speaks over and over again. Do not be afraid. Be not afraid. Do not fear. And we have good reason to hear those not just as empty words, but words that are full of God's promise. Romans 8:31 says, if God is for us, then who can be against us? Mary understood this, knowing how much God loved her, knowing that God knew her name, knowing that God cherishes her story. I hope and pray that you can come to do the same. To learn to trust in God's love for you, knowing that He knows your name, and knowing that He too cherishes your story.